Got some breaking news here for the entire nation. Luke Getsy sucks as a play caller. And coming up here on today's show, I'm going to tell all of y'all why the Raiders need to get rid of this clown that I got over here and that somebody else has to start doing some play calling. So I know Antonio Pierce said business decision a few weeks ago. Well, guess what, AP? Guess what, Mark Davis? Guess what, Telesco? Guess what, Las Vegas? It is time for the Raiders to make a business decision and either fire Luke Getsy or take away the play calling duties. And I'm going to tell you everybody that's better at the job currently on the Raiders in today's show. Coming up here on the Raiders Report, the Raiders got to move on from Getsy, got to get somebody else calling some plays. So let's look at some of the top candidates on the Raiders coaching staff because let's face it, if the Raiders do actually do the smart thing and move on from Getsy or just demote him in some way, shape, or form, it's probably going to be a promotion, an interim of sorts, at the offensive coordinator position. But that's not only what we're going to talk about today. We're also going to look at the top candidates in 2025 because I will bet money that I don't even have that Luke Getsy is not the Raiders offensive coordinator next season. And if he is, then everybody that is a part of this regime deserves to not be a part of this regime anymore. Because if you're going to keep Getsy after what we've seen this year and what we've seen in the last two seasons, hell, they might have to not lose a game for the remainder of the season for Luke Getsy to be an OC next season. So I know this. And I made a promise last year when the Raiders fired Josh McDaniels that I would go live for 24 straight hours. Chugs is like, don't do it to me again. I'm not going to do that. But I will go live when the Raiders fire Luke Getsy because I know that Getsy's not the long-term answer. You guys know that Getsy's not the long-term answer. When you bring in somebody that has failed basically everywhere that they've gone before, and then you bring him into your joint, I don't really understand how you think that that's going to work. But I know this. Luke Getsy will not be the Raiders OC in 2025, and I think that there's going to be a time at this point of the season where Getsy's not going to be the OC, and I promise we will go live, and we're going to celebrate our freaking you-know-what's off to just say that we're moving in the right direction. You know who's not moving in the right direction? This Raiders offense, and all these numbers definitely indicate that. Turnovers not great, the rushing yards not great, and we haven't even played some of the best teams in the NFL this season. So what we're going to do here is we're going to work our way from 5 all the way down to 1 of the Getsy replacements. I'm first going to start with the guys that are on our roster. And then at the end of the show, I'll tell you about the dudes that I want to bring in for 2025. Let's go to number 5 here on this list. And the way that I have constructed this list is based on what I would do. If I'm going to sit up here and call Luke Getsy a clown, if I'm going to sit up here and say that they got to move on from him and somebody else has to call plays, well, then it's my job to say, all right, I found the problem. Luke Getsy. What's the solution? We got to find 5 better options. And I'll tell you this right now. I'm not a big fan of Rich Scangarello at all. But at this point, I would really trust just about anybody to call plays that's not Luke Getsy. Because right now you're staring at a Josh McDaniels 2.0 with Getsy. Rich Scangarello was the OC at Kentucky and quarterback coach in 2022. Denver Broncos OC in 2019. And I'll tell you this. Even though he hasn't lasted longer than 3 years at any job since his UC Davis job in 2004, 2007, Rich Scangarello, another person that I don't know how the hell he got hired here by this Raiders team, and it's another bad showing by Antonio Pierce because when you're a defensive-minded head coach, it's your job to go put together a good offensive staff. You trusted Luke Getsy. They also brought in Rich Scangarello. Scangarello's been fired from his last 6 jobs that he's had. But guess what? I still rather have him than Luke Getsy. Let's go to number 4 here on my Getsy replacements list. It's Luke Steckel, the current tight end coach here for the Silver and Black. And he is a very well-respected coach in the NFL, a very well-respected coach for the Las Vegas Raiders. And even though he doesn't have any offensive coordinator experience, I would trust him more than Luke Getsy. And he went to Princeton, which I think is a pretty smart school last time that I checked. But he is regarded as being a very intelligent, very new style coach, which a lot of people that watch this show know that I want a younger, friendly, offensive-minded type of coach. But my favorite thing about Steckel, and I mention this a lot, when usually a new head coach comes in, they bring in a brand new regime, right? Steckel, when he was with Tennessee, with the Titans, they had 4 different head coaches. So that meant 4 different head coaches thought that this guy was good enough to be able to keep on their staff. That is a very important thing because when you take 2-2, and the 2-2 is, I heard a lot of good stuff about Steckel. Very well respected in that locker room. And then you hear about all these other head coaches that have said the exact same thing. Sooner or later, you got to give somebody an opportunity. Just hopefully it doesn't turn out as bad as what we've had with Luke Getsy. Let's go to number 3 here. It's Joe Philbin. And the last time that I made this video, I had Philbin ranked number 1 because I did that video in a style of what I think Antonio Pierce would do if Luke Getsy would get fired. This show is based on what I would do if I was the Raiders and making the call. And no disrespect to Joe Philbin, but he hasn't really been in the NFL realm calling plays in quite some time. Now, has he been a head coach? Yes. Has he been an OC? Yes. He's done some stuff with the offensive line, which are all things that, let's face it, this football team needs help with. And he's been in the coaching realm, college, NFL, since 1984. You can go back, you can look at a lot of those numbers. Also, I know Antonio Pierce trusts him, but when you look at the numbers that Joe Philbin had as an offensive coordinator, there's a lot of really good numbers here. I'll also say there's a lot of, great quarterback play with Aaron Rodgers, and I think that's one of the reasons why Philbin is a part of the staff. Kind of all ties in back with Green Bay, kind of all ties back in with Chicago. But from 2007 to, realistically 2011, this is one of the best offenses in the NFL. It's kind of hard to gauge how good Philbin was simply because he had Aaron Rodgers. And then you look at that year in 2018, had Rodgers but ended up getting hurt. Joe Philbin has some OC experience, but I would be concerned that we would run the same style of offense, kind of like what Luke Getsy is doing, because even Luke Getsy looked pretty good with, Aaron Rodgers. Here's the pinned comment on today's show. I want you to give me a name. If the Raiders end up firing Luke Getsy, okay, or maybe they don't fire Getsy, but they're like, all right, man, you got to go do something else. Somebody else is going to call these plays. Who should be the person calling the Raiders plays? You're about to get hit with a YouTube ad break. After the ad is playing, I'm going to give you my answers. I mean, I can't just tell you right now. What fun would that be? Coming up at 2, coming up at number 1, these are the names that I would pick if I was the Las Vegas Raiders to go replace Luke Getsy. First name is Scott Turner. And the last time I made this video, Turner was number 4. And the reason why I'm putting Turner here is because pass game coordinator, I'm so sick and tired of watching the Raiders trying to run the football, pick up 2 to 3 yards. If Scott Turner's your brand new OC, guess what? He's going to throw the rock. That's what his dad did. That's what Scott Turner is kind of known for. And I know that he was the Washington Commanders OC for 3 seasons, and it wasn't all that great. But neither were the Washington Football Commanders Redskins. Like, he went through all those different team changes, and, we could talk about the Raiders being a bad organization, and they're not a great organization. Let's face it. It's another team that was a really bad organization for a long time, and kind of looks like that they figured it out maybe this season with Jaden Daniels. It looks like the Washington Commanders. And again, these numbers are not spectacular, but go back and look at the quarterbacks that Washington was using, and Washington's quarterbacks were Taylor Heineke, some other no-name QB, and some other no-name QB, right? I mean, it was mix and match. But when you look at how Turner runs his offense, and some of my favorite offenses that I saw, the Turner family run, Phillip Rivers, the Chargers back there in San Diego, and I'm not sitting up here trying to compare Aiden O'Connell to Phillip Rivers, who might be an NFL Hall of Famer. Rivers wouldn't be my Hall of Fame just because never really got anything done in the postseason. That's how I judge a lot of times quarterbacks. But from a skill set standpoint, Philip Rivers wasn't running the football. He wasn't doing anything. He was a statue in the pocket. It's exactly what Aiden O'Connell is. So for that reason, Scott Turner now is number 2 on my list, which means one more name to get to. Coming up here on the Raiders Report, I'm going to tell you the number 1 coach who should be the Raiders offensive coordinator if they fire Luke Getsy, or if they do the smart thing and take play calling duties away from that clown show. So before I get into that, our show sponsor here is Prize Picks, and Monday Night Football is about to get rolling in probably about an hour from the time that y'all end up watching this video. And if you haven't already gotten a lineup in, make sure you do so. It's easy. It's exciting. Daily fantasy sports. PrizePicks.com/CLNS. Now, PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. Download the PrizePicks app today, use code CLNS, and get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Now, I know that you're looking up on screen right now. This is my lineup that we decided to go with, and sometimes we talk to a bunch of the people here at Chat Sports, and this is Chug's. So I'm not even going to take credit for this being my lineup. When I say my lineup, like, this is our Chat Sports lineup today. So we'll see if this one ends up happening. I'll have to send it to my dad. Jugs is yelling at me in the background. What do you say? Jugs likes it. I'm kind of looking through it right now. There's a lot of mores, which I usually get a little bit nervous about. I'm not going to lie, especially in interdivision games. But hey, no matter what, you're going to watch this game, you're going to root for these things to happen, and you're going to have a great time. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. PrizePicks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy, so if your lineup stays in play, even if one of your players gets injured. If your player leaves in the first half and doesn't return, PrizePicks keeps your lineup live. So if you want to go get started, prizepicks.com/CLNS. That code's in the comments and in the description of today's show. Let's go to number 1 here for my Getsy replacement. Edgar Bennett, Raiders wide receiver coach. And this was a tough one between him and Turner, and the only reason why I'm going this route is because Edgar Bennett is probably one of the most respected coaches in that Raiders locker room that is not a offensive coordinator, head coach, and I don't even want to say OC. Edgar Bennett kind of gives me Antonio Pierce vibes last season where, a lot of people might not have said AP should have been the interim head coach, but the team rallied around him. And I think the team would do the exact same thing here and rally behind Edgar Bennett. And this is not going to be a problem where you get a brand new OC and all of our solutions are solved. No, I mean, that's not going to happen. All I'm trying to do is get a football team that shows me that they want to play. A football team that's not giving up. A football team when they put on that Raiders jersey and even if they lose, you go, you know what? That team played their freaking hearts out, which you can't say that this Raiders team has done, especially on the offensive side of the football. But for Edgar Bennett, he's a player coach, which is something that this staff has really looked at, and it's something that a lot of these players have responded to. He's been an OC in the past. And again, he's worked with Aaron Rodgers. He's worked with a lot of these Green Bay Packers teams. And I know 2017, you look at those numbers, you're like, Mitch, not all that great. That was the year Aaron Rodgers ended up getting injured. So when Rodgers was healthy, it was pretty good, and you saw some improvement there. But I'm simply just going from who are we trying to get? Like, I want our players to go out there and play with heart. And until those guys go out there and play with heart, it's really, really hard to sit up here and even wonder if we're going to win some football games. Edgar Bennett's going to get the most out of the guys. Well-respected coach. Got some of the OC experience. That's the guy that I would roll with. Coming up here, though, let's look at some of the top 2025 offensive coordinator candidates. And I'll say this. The names that you're about to see are based on if you want to keep Antonio Pierce as your head coach, but you just want to get somebody else at OC and you want to build a different staff, these are the names to keep in mind. So some of the top names that I got on here, Jerrod Johnson, definitely a name to keep in mind. I like finding people from certain trees like the McVay tree, the Shanahan tree, so Clay Kubiak, Nate Scheelhaus is definitely somebody that I'm keeping an eye on. Tanner Engstrand, the pass game coordinator for Detroit. Maybe if we decide to bring in Ben Johnson. If the Raiders want to go out and bring in Jalen Milroe, Chris Hewitt will be a name. And then Joe Blameyer, the pass game coordinator for Kansas City. Let's take somebody who's very well liked in that organization and potentially make him our offensive coordinator here for the Silver and Black. So coming up is the other honest conversation that we have to have. And, if Antonio Pierce has the right and has the ability to say, sometimes we got to make business decisions because he's right. In the NFL, when you got a job to do, you got to make business decisions. Well, I also have a business decision to make, and I got to be able to do my best job to give content out here to the nation on all things that are possible. And if the Raiders are a dumpster fire on offense, and if you have a top 5 pick or if you have the number 1 overall pick, I think the Raiders got to make a business decision, and you got to move on from AP, and you got to put a brand new head coach that can also call plays because that's kind of the way the NFL is going. If you're going to draft QB in the top 5, I want an offensive coordinator. I want a head coach that's also calling those plays. So coming up, we're going to look at some AP replacements if that's the route we have to go. Just so you don't miss it, we're going to be live tomorrow, 4 p.m. Eastern time here on the Raiders Report, unless breaking news happens, unless there's any updates around Davante Adams, we'll be in the loop there. We're going to be live for Thursday Night Football. Broncos Saints. I really wish that Derek Carr was playing in this one, but hey, this is going to be a really, really fun day, and I got to wear a freaking cheerleader costume. Then, Week 7 live, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Raiders, Rams, both teams need a win. I'm going to show up and give my all. My question is, will you? So, let's look at some of these AP replacements, and I have them ranked, okay? This is my top 4. If the Raiders are going to move on from Antonio Pierce, I want an offensive-minded head coach. And all of these guys right here, they're not going to be OCs for the Raiders. Clint Kubiak, if you ended up hiring him, he would be the head coach. Joe Brady, offensive coordinator for Buffalo, would be the head coach. Bobby Slovic, head coach. But number 1, and it's not even close to me. And I think if the Raiders, the only way you're getting Ben Johnson is if you don't spend any of that salary cap space, you get extra draft capital, and you're in the top 3. Quite frankly, I think you might have to have the number 1 overall pick. But if the Raiders do have the number 1 overall pick, or if the Raiders do have a top 5 pick, and you know that you need a franchise quarterback, based on what we've seen this season from Antonio Pierce, and based on we've seen from the regime that AP's team has brought in on the offensive side of the football, you can't trust this current regime in terms of AP or our offensive coordinators to get the most out of that quarterback spot. So if the Raiders are in the top 5, I will be somebody that sits up here and goes, it's time for the Raiders to make a business decision. Bring in an offensive-minded head coach. Let that head coach go get his quarterback, because I don't trust AP and I don't trust Luke Getsy to be able to do that correct job. I will throw in 2 extra names, though, because I've been somebody that's been saying, hey, look out for offensive-minded head coaches. But the Raiders are about to give Tom Brady a small ownership stake in the Raiders. And I also know that they're going to allow Tom Brady to have a say. And 2 head coaches that Tom Brady loves, 2 people that are very well respected inside of this Raiders organization. I know you see the name Bill Belichick, and it probably makes you cringe a little bit because of the New England ties. And I don't really know if I want Belichick either, because he hasn't been successful without Brady. But the name Mike Vrabel, I'm telling y'all right now, if the Raiders don't think that they can get an offensive-minded head coach, and they like some of these offensive coordinators or some of these names that are about to be offensive coordinators in 2025, these are 2 names that absolutely could be Raiders head coaches if we finish in the top 5 of overall picks for 2025. Now, I know that this is a shitty time of the week. I'm not going to lie. When the Raiders lose, a lot of people are going after each other. But here's the thing. If you need to take some of that frustration out, take it out on me. I'm a Mets fan. Let's go, Mets. Take care of business against the Dodgers.